Hey, Brian, do you mind making me the host, please?
Well, do you are a co-host, but yeah, I'll do it.
It won't let, it doesn't give me the option to do the, start the streaming.
Done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Bowling
Yeah,
Green,
I know what London's east.
Bowling Green, Auburn.
Hey, Sonia. Can you hear me?
Sorry, I had you muted. Yes, sir?
So let's just make sure when Corey's name's called to remind everybody that he's teaching and he told us in advance and he's going to get there as quickly as he can. He just texted me as well.
Okay.
Thanks.
Did I miss roll call of my name?
No, we haven't
Okay,
called it yet.
go further this game, but that was the thing with that.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead. Can you hear me, Sonia?
Yes, sir.
I think we're going to go ahead and start. I just talked to Earl. He asked me to go ahead and get rolling. He's going to call in. We'll go ahead and Jacory's on his way. We can we'll go ahead and call the roll, and then we'll start. Well, any comments that we have on anything, we'll hold to, or make sure we'll hold to get Earl on the line. But the ones that are not any comments, we'll just go ahead and move forward with. So go ahead and call the roll if you're ready.
Sorry. Representative Jason Nemus,
Yes, here.
Earl Jones, Senator Gerald Neal, Senator Julie Rocky Adams,
I'm here.
Senator Mike Nemus,
Present.
Representative Ken Fleming,
Here.
Representative Pamela Stevenson,
Present.
Councilmember Anthony Piagentini, Councilmember Jacory Arthur, Councilmember Cindy Fowler, Mary Ann Butler,
Here.
Shelby Williams Somerville, Scott Schoenberger, Mayor Bonnie Jung,
Here.
Chief Sean Drysback.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 9 and a quorum.
Okay, sounds good. So does everybody have the sheet in front of them that has the recommendations? I think it's 26 pages. Obviously, a lot of them will be going very fast through. Is that in front of everyone? Sonia, was that handed out?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
At least the people that are in the room have it.
Great. And the ones that aren't in the room had it. They should have had it emailed to them. So we'll just start from the top. Number one is the length. So just so everybody knows what this is, the first column obviously has the number of the recommendation. There are a total of 39 that we considered, not that we will make the recommendation of. The second column, it just says just a brief synopsis of what it is, like road funding, government board, so forth and so on. The third column is who made the recommendation. The fourth column is the initial proposal, and then the fifth column is what Earl and I understand the agreement of the commission to be. So if we could just, if everybody could just take a moment to read, I don't know if we need to read them out loud, just take a moment to read the fifth column. Begins, the commission recommends that the state, so forth and so on, and we'll take any comments on that, and if there are none, we'll assume that it's, I'll give a little bit of time, we'll assume that it's as we've understood the commission to recommend.
Mr. Chairman, do you want to do housekeeping as we go along? Like on column number 5, where it talks about backlogs and road funding determinations, that was in bold except for ONS. Just would like the document to be really clean.
Yes, and there will be no bold. That was kind of the changes that we thought that we needed to highlight, or that Earl thought that needed to be highlighted, but there'll be no bold in the ultimate.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that catch. Okay, so without objection, we'll move forward. We'll consider that one as appropriate to what we agreed to. Okay, so no more on page 1, page 2 or 3. I'll give everybody a moment just to make sure that's right. We'll ask to page 4. I don't know if Scott is on the line. It doesn't look like he is. Everybody just look to make sure that's your understanding of the recommendation there. And that's item number 6. All right, so we'll go to page 5, item number 7. Earl made that tighter, but same concepts. Without any objections, we'll move to item number 8. It's a longer one, so I'll give a little bit more time. Okay. Any comments on 8? And you'll just have to go in because I won't be able to see you raising your hand, obviously. Item number 9 and 10, we thought were encompassed in the ones that we've suggested. Check to make sure that's everyone's understanding. On the office building, you'll note that we added that to Ms. Butler's recommendation at the bottom of number 8. Okay, so let's move to item number 11 on page 8. We made some changes, I think, with regard to suggestions from Ms. Fowler, Councilwoman Fowler, on that. And that is at the end of that recommendation.
Sorry, Representative Nemes, I just want to be clear. Are you saying, I'm on page 8 going into page 9. Are you saying that it was the recommendation is the last sentence there, however, the commission recommends the Metro Council studies issues related to TARC, et cetera, et cetera? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, the change that Ms. Fowler recommended was that we added service across the entire community.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
And that covers the rest of the ones that were related to TARC, which had a number of recommendations. The next one is item 15.
Mr.
Yes, go ahead.
Chairman,
Yes.
Can we hold for 1 second, please? Senator Neal is here.
Just a quick pause. Mr. Chair, just for clarity, we're on the first column, number 15, page 10, EMS. Is that correct?
Right, that's what we're about to turn to.
Gotcha.
Yes,
One
sir.
more second and we'll be ready to roll.
No problem. And Senator Neal, the one clarification we've made thus far is just a note that when we submit the final, there will not be highlights or bolds. There are some in the document. Those were things that either Earl or I thought we needed to bring to the attention of the group. But there will not be bolds or highlights unless the commission decides otherwise on the call today. But when you see that, you can point them out, but know that we intend to remove those.
Well, if I may, I just want to be clear. Senator Nemus gave me an explanation, which I accept, but I thought we were doing something different. I thought we were voting today
We'll go over it again.
on the final wording. Is that correct or incorrect?
No, well, I guess it's a little bit of, I don't know how to answer. Here's what we were doing today. We had voted on all these concepts and we made language changes. Earl and I were supposed to go back, make sure we made the changes. We submitted them to everybody. I think it was Tuesday. And we're going through just to make sure that the language of the particular recommendation encapsulates the agreement that the commission voted on earlier. So we won't be voting on anything in particular unless, for example, you were to say, just to go to number 1, for example, you were to say, hey, I want to add this sentence, and then we would take that up. But other than that, it's just make sure that the language encapsulates what the commission voted on earlier. Is that fair?
Understood.
So, Senator Neal, I don't think any of the ones that we went to are the ones that had many negative votes on those. We're coming up to those because those are the ones obviously everybody's going to want to make sure that we got on point. And so we're on number 15 on page 10. So let's go ahead and have everybody, I'll take a moment and let everybody review that to make sure it's and I don't think, by the way, when we voted, I don't think we made any changes to this, but I'll be quiet while everybody reads.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Of course.
I thought we were starting at 3. I had that in my phone, but then I looked at my LA's transmission and said 2, so I kind of blew it. It's the same problem? Okay. So it'll be okay if I do review something, we can revisit it. Is that okay?
Of course.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
On this item 15, I'm still not comfortable with this. I don't think it's as simplistic as it's made out to seem in this. I think there are some other ramifications that we just don't know about. So I'm not real comfortable putting this in there like it was a unanimous decision.
Yeah, it's not, it won't be noted as that, Mary Ann.
How are we going to note it?
The vote on this, Sonia, I don't know if Sonia was the one counting it the day we did that, but the vote on this will be represented. I think it was 9-5. We'll go back, but the vote will be reflected. This is not, what we're not going to use today is to say there were 14 people here and there were no objections. So thank you for that clarification though. I think that's an important one.
And then it also, in this, it says the Chapter 75 Fire Protection Services, i.e. Shively and Fairdale, Shively is not a Chapter 75. It's a department of Shively.
I think maybe we delete Shively and the word Shively in that parenthetical. If there are no objections to that, if there are, state your objection. Okay. Any other changes to number 15?
Can we also encourage those Chapter 75 fire districts to recoup their costs by charging for non-transports and other things, at least for them to consider looking at that?
Yeah, I think we mentioned that a number of times, and I think that's encapsulated in that recommendation number 15 sub 3. I'm trying to find that, what line that is. It says third, the commission recommends that all EMS service providers in the county, along with Chapter 75, so forth and so on, enter into interlocal agreements concerning reimbursements for services provided by one service provider to another area outside its primary jurisdiction. I think that would encompass that.
Well, I don't know that they need an interlocal agreement because their certificate of need says they have to provide for the entire community.
Right.
But if someone says, no, I don't want transport, and they've called, that person should pay.
Understood. And that's what they have the ability to do now.
Yeah,
But
and
not
that,
do-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Marianne.
No, I said they're just not doing it though.
Go ahead, Sean.
I'm sorry, we're not doing what? What, are we not responding to the entire county? Is that what you meant?
No, if you go someplace and the person says, no, I don't want to be transported, you don't charge right now.
That's correct. You're right about that.
Okay.
And I would just suggest is allow the actual Chapter 75 fire districts as well as Louisville Metro EMS to work up that interlocal agreement with their mutual aid agreement on how billing will happen across the county as well as going outside each other's jurisdictions. If you leave it up to us to do that, I think that way it would be a lot easier for us to be on the same page, if that makes sense.
Marianne, your suggestion, Ken Fleming had that suggestion in that language. I pointed to the wrong place. I apologize. If you read the last sentence, the commission recommends consideration of statutory changes to require part of these interlocal agreements to address reimbursements where non-transport. I think that addresses what you're referring to.
Okay.
Okay, any other changes or comments on 15? All right, let's turn to page 12, number 17. It's the next one with a recommendation. We added back in, just to make sure it's crystal clear for everyone, the constitutional amendment language. So take a moment to make sure that you see that. You not hearing any comments on 17?
I have
Okay,
one
go
more
ahead.
question. I have one
Yes, sir.
question on it.
Yes, sir.
And you'll understand if Representative Meredith's bill goes through, then this doesn't need to be because all cities will be able to do it. Is that correct?
That's right. So yes, sir.
I got you.
Any other comments on 17? Okay. We can move to page 14, number 23. It's the next one with the recommendation. So this is one that we never agreed on the specific language because we didn't have it ready. Earl and I went back to the drawing board. I think everybody please tell me if I'm wrong. I think everybody agreed with the concept. The concept is if there is any annexation, let's say in my area, Fincastle, for example, if they were to try to annex Ford truck plant, that's something that I think all of us agreed would be something that we don't want to be allowed. Somebody wants to annex GE, for example, so forth, for the purpose of taken their occupational tax, which would then And also if it had housing as well, they could take some of the insurance premium taxes, but we're talking about businesses here. So the language that we had before, we had 200 full-time employees. That was just pulled out of thin air as a placeholder. What Earl suggests is he and I got together and we thought the language that you see on page 14 would satisfy what we need. We'll obviously work with the mayor's office. They're very interested in making sure we get this language right. And so is our business community. So just, I wanted to highlight that this is the one that we really didn't agree on any language. We just agreed in concept. So any thoughts about the way we've done that here?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would say that first of all, I support the way the language is. I would give another example, which is the East Point Commercial District in my area. It does have neighboring suburban cities that we wouldn't want to annex just that commercial district just for the sake of grabbing that tax base. So, again, I like that it says annex an area for the primary purpose or result, because somebody might say, well, that wasn't our purpose, but the result was X. So I think it's important to designate that. And then to your point, the actual execution of it can be dealt with in legislation, but I think it captures what the intent was. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's a good example, Tony, because even if it's a number of businesses rather than just one, let's say all the businesses each had, just to make a hypothetical, each of them had 30 employees, but there were 30 businesses. That's also what we're trying to make sure doesn't happen as well. So it's not just the huge employers, but it's also the big office parks kind of thing too, like Riverport, so forth. I would note that we need to make sure that occupational is spelled correctly. So I thought Bonnie would point that out. I've given her an opportunity, but she didn't, so I did that. Any more comments on 23?
Take care of that misspelling for us, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Bonnie. Any other questions on 23? Okay, 24. I don't know if Councilman Arthur's there yet or not. He's on his way. I'll take a moment so people can read that. And we'll remember the discussion about this is to inform residents if they want to annex or incorporate that they get information about their options.
Mr. Chairman, somehow I'd like to link in either that the information of suburban cities and folks who ask, either this department works with the Jefferson County League of Cities to establish that information and/or make those folks' information available to the League of Cities, or how can we word that? Because I don't think there's anybody that knows more about cities and services than cities. And I think that if this is going to be a part of it, it's vital that they have a seat at that table somehow.
Okay, so since we have a suggested change there, we're going to skip this one and come back. I want to make sure that you give Earl an opportunity to be heard as well on that.
Yes, and also, Mr. Chairman, that would also apply to the very last one, so we just don't have to do it again. Or else that would apply to page 24.
Okay, let's get to that. Yeah, highlight that when we get there, Bonnie. Is that okay?
Okay. All right,
So
thank you.
we're going to come back to number 24. That's the first one we're going to come back to. Let's go ahead and go on to number 27 on page 17.
Again, Mr. Chairman, there's just a couple of typographical typos in that.
I have three: the word achieve, the word appoint, and the word otherwise. Any others?
I do have some.
Go ahead,
Senator. Just in my experience, when they deal with the subject matter of diversity, it becomes kind of a run through, and people make some meager effort, and they come up with, well, we didn't get there, so we have to go on and not deal with that particular issue. But I think this point here that you have here says, provided, however, that if diversity cannot be achieved, I think it says the appointing authority shall document and make public the reasons why. But I think in that piece, they should also demonstrate the effort and inability to achieve the diversity. I think that should be a part of any report that they would make.
Gerald, I don't think that'll be controversial, but since that's a suggested change, we're going to put a pin in that and give Earl an opportunity to come back, and we'll definitely, I think that we'll have to wordsmith. So while we're going on, if you've got a moment, just try to see where you think you want to add that in. And we're going to come back to 27 if that's fair.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Number 28, I've got a question mark there myself. So let's mark that one. Come back to that one. So that's the third one we'll come back to. And go to number 30. If I'm going too fast, slow me down. Number 30. Take a moment on that one. Any suggested changes on 30? Number 31. Yeah, go ahead, Senator.
Okay. That's okay, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, number 31. We'll remember this is the one that Chairman Jones had to with his hope to have, in addition to the district particular council persons, also to have at-large council persons. His hope would that they would have more of a global interest or represent more of a global interest, and we changed that to make it, as you'll read, a review to determine the best organization of the council. That's obviously shorthand, but I'll be quiet as everyone reads.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
when we first did merger, it was a situation where they put boards and commissions together. They went very much in depth with the community. It was pretty much something that the community collectively, over a series of actions, came up with. But I'm wondering if we're going to, and this takes in 30 and 31, if we're going to create a different arrangement with respect to Metro Council or some of these particular legislative pieces or districts, that should not the citizens of the affected areas also be part of the approval process? And let me just put it this way. I'm recommending that be so. And the reason why I think that's important is because this is the structures that we are now utilizing are the ones that we have been living under. And if we take this away to Frankfurt, then it becomes the idea of something that somebody wants to happen, but really is not necessarily reflective of the people who are intended to be served by the change. So I think if we also allowed or subjected this to also the vote, or maybe whatever they come up with, if anything, in Frankfurt is submitted back to the voting districts that are affected, I think that would be a reasonable resolution.
Well, number 31, Senator, it mentions that the review will be local and then they'll submit to the General Assembly. What they would, I think it's results of the review. I'm looking at Gerald, the last sentence. The results of the review.
I think you're right. I think I'm really stuck on 30.
I figured you would be, Gerald.
Mr. Chairman.
I thought that's what you're referring to, but so
Yeah.
30 doesn't have that in there.
So why
Go
would
ahead.
it not?
Well, it was voted 11-2. It was something that we discussed and it just wasn't in there.
Well, we didn't discuss the other matter that you said had no problem, and I'm just saying I think it's important for everyone to vote in this process. I think that's always reasonable. I think transparency is always reasonable. I think looking at something is always reasonable, particularly after a period of time, such as this commission is doing. So I would recommend and would think that would not be controversial, just as 31 is not, and would recommend that we include that particular piece.
Okay, so we'll
Unless
make a recommendation. Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead, Gerald.
No, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, so you're asking to reconsider a vote that we've already made. Today was about, and that vote was pretty solid, 11-2. I think today was about the making sure that we already voted on the concept to make sure the language was as we understood the agreement to already have been.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator.
on number 30, you're correct. That was discussed, and then we had a vote on it to do this and not to study it. As Bonnie mentioned, it was passed through the House, but we're suggesting that be passed through the whole General Assembly, and we did vote on that. Number 31, Senator Neal's concerns were discussed, and he brought it up, that the locals should have input in this and not sent to the state to do, and that's why we put in there for a study for the Metro Council to have it in.
I'm okay with 31. I was really
Okay.
specifically dealing with 30.
Okay, well, my
30,
answer to that was we did discuss that and vote on it.
well, we discussed all these things and voted on it, and we're here and we have the power and ability to make adjustments, and I'm requesting that we do that
Okay,
because these are districts that are affected, and they should have direct input into that instead of getting a mandate from Frankfurt. That's all I'm saying. You know, we live here. We don't live in Frankfurt.
Miss,
I'm
Understood.
making a
The
request.
mandate-
Making a request. Why would we be afraid of the vote of the people in the district that we're going to affect in terms of how they want to govern themselves? Why would we have an issue there?
Mr. Chair, can I make a quick point?
Go ahead, Councilman.
If I could respond to Senator Neal, it's because we don't do that with any other legislation that comes out of Frankfurt. In this last legislative session, Frankfurt passed, 100+ bills out of the Senate. How many bills passed out of the Senate this past session?
I reject that categorically.
Well, but-
I'm making a specific request.
To this
And I have a
one thing.
specific reason. Well, we do a lot of one things from Frankfurt, and we defer to local governments. We do all kinds of things. I'm just making a specific
Yeah.
response
And
to
Jer-
this particular piece, and that does not delegitimize the request. That's,
No,
I'm not saying that,
I-
Senator Neal,
Go
I'm
ahead.
not saying that the request is not legitimate. I'm simply saying we have a
I'm
representative.
just making a
of the public.
request. If y'all don't want to interview it, you don't want to entertain it, that's fine. I'm just making a
Yeah, so,
request.
so
Hold on.
Senator, what I'm going to say is that wasn't what we were going to do today. We're not going to do that. We'll take up recommendations on particular language that would better reflect what the vote was what we've already had a vote on. For example, on number 31, we didn't have the exact language down. We wrote concepts down because we changed Earl's recommendation from make it happen that have 18 and 6 to study the commission. So I think we'll take recommendations on changing of wording, but not on changing of concepts that we've already voted on. But I note your request.
Thank you, sir.
I agree with Senator Neal. I don't know why we can't take this to a vote for the people. I mean, this really changes how Metro is and how it was explained to them. And they should have a say.
We had a pretty robust
Get
debate on.
their representation.
Yeah, we had a robust debate on 30. The language of 30 represents what we agreed to or what we voted on. Does the language on 31 represent what we agreed to? Or any comments
Mr.
on the language
Chairman.
on 30? Yes, sir.
All due respect, you know I've been critical of this process from the beginning. I don't want to get into all the reasons why. I will address those later in a different forum. But my point is that this process, we're not trying to lock something in stone here, are we? From here until the state, which on a very political subject, by the way, which is party dominant in terms of how this is going to turn out in the first place. Let's not be naive. None of us are, I'm sure, that we don't subject a change of government to those affected on the local level in this circumstance. So, it's nice, look, we're all friends, I respect and like to have a beer with a couple of you guys. But at the end of the day, we all know the playing field that we're functioning on. And, for one person, I don't play any games. I'm just looking at it straight. We know what this is. This is a political gambit. And the question is, and I don't mean that negatively, I'm just saying there's some opinions here, and I'm saying that people that are being affected should have a direct say in how they want to be governed and not mandated from a political structure far removed from them in Frankfurt. And
Thank
I
you,
look at
Senator.
that-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I understand. I don't want to say too much. I've said what I had to say. I'm good.
So I would say I would say three things. The partisanship is in state law, so it's demanded by Frankfurt now. Number one. Number two, we had a robust debate on this where it was submitted much in advance. We had a robust debate on it. And then the third thing, with respect to your question, your assertion of a political gambit, I would note that this was an 11 to 2 vote. Even the majority of the Democrats on this commission voted for it. So that's not why we're here today.
We're
here
just a
today-
few people. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, go ahead.
No, it's about 50-50 on this commission. The majority of the Democrats on the commission voted for it. But what we're here today for, and what we've announced to the community and to the members of the commission, is that we're here to make sure that the language accurately reflects the vote that the commission took. And so if you want to make an allegation that 30 doesn't, then accurately reflect what we voted, then I'll consider that revisit won't be considered.
Let the record reflect that I've said repeatedly, this is a flawed process, that this process does not take in consideration the type of research that's necessary to understand and take in consideration the implications of some of the moves that we're making here. And that notwithstanding your comment about robust discussion, you know, if you don't have all the information before you and the research is not done adequately and the process is not extended so everyone has a very informed vote, we can talk all day long. That does not make it robust. So I just want to take issue with that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Senator. And the record certainly reflects that, and I'm sure you'll make the Senate record reflect it as well. Number 31, does it accurately reflect, the language accurately reflect the changes that we made to Chairman Jones's recommendation? All right, let's move to number 32.
Mr. Chairman, can we add the entire language back in
On
when it comes to dealing?
32.
Yes,
Okay, so
as
we're gonna-
explanation.
let's come back to that. You think that the vote that we took included the language that we had before? Since you're going to make that recommendation, let's come back to that. So I want to tag that one and go to 33. We will come back to 32, Bonnie, and hear you out on that one. Number 33. Okay, number 34.
Number, if I may.
Yes, sir.
I noticed that here we have, and I think there's an attempt here to have a representative group of people who are knowledgeable to look at this issue regarding the PVA. And we had a lot of testimony that this already is actually structured to do that anyway. But okay, be that as it may. But I would recommend that we also add to the appointing authority, and I know you want, I think you have 5 here, that we consider 7 and including the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Louisville, who are also a very important player and aspect of the real estate world, and I think would give another dimension, in fact, value to the process that I think you're attempting to achieve here. So I'm just recommending that we do that.
So Gerald, I heard you say you wanted to add 2, but one of them I heard was National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Was you recommend that they do 2, or did you have a second group to add another one?
Well, the reason I said 2 is because I know you all, in these kinds of things, you always want to have an odd number so you don't get stuck. That's the only reason I said 2. If I could have done it with 1, I'd said 1.
So your recommendation is to add 2, and that the National Association of Real Estate Brokers gets to appoint, right?
The National Association of Real Estate Broker, Louisville.
Okay.
Not-
So-
not-
That's the Louisville chapter, correct?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's what, yeah, he wants a Louisville chapter. Yeah, that's what he just
Yes.
said. Okay,
Yes.
so but I'm gonna do 2 things. Number 1, I don't think that is a substantive change. I think that's more of a procedural change, and so I will entertain that. Is there any objections to adding the 2 appointments from National Association of Real Estate Brokers from Louisville?
No, that's a good ad. I appreciate Senator Neal doing that.
Thank you.
Okay, without any objections, we'll add that. The one thing I wanted to highlight on this one is you'll remember that we heard from Ms. Younger that doing an assessment or an appraisal of one house is different than like an assessment for tax purposes or broad purposes. So
Yeah.
we added the language at the very end. If you'll follow along with me, the last sentence, or you could just turn to page 23 if you wanted to, and it says all of whom must be qualified to evaluate property for tax assessment purposes. Earl and I think that encapsulates the thought that Ms. Younger had there. So that was a change that we made. I wanted to highlight. Any other suggestions on 34?
Now, is this going to be across the board for all PVAs or only Jefferson County?
Jefferson County.
Well, I mean, if it's good for Jefferson County, why isn't it good across the state?
Now, why would we limit that?
Well, this is going to the heart of the matter, but we had testimony from her, from our PVA. The thought is that we have and we've got some evidence that there might be some differences in assessments in Jefferson County. And so we don't have that there's evidence that there's differences in assessments elsewhere. And obviously this commission is about Louisville. So that's the reason that it's just Louisville.
Right. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to reiterate your last statement and that,
Yes.
the purpose of this commission, which was the suggestion of Representative Joni Jenkins, was set up so that we could look at merger and Louisville and what's working, what's not working, what is great, what might need to be tweaked. So this is a Louisville specific project that we're working on.
Councilman Piagentini.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would point out that, I mean, I think the point was made earlier that, just about the question of, we come from Louisville here, and we're making decisions about Louisville as a bipartisan group. I'm sure nobody is recommending that this group, that none of which of us represent the rest of the state, is making recommendations related to the rest of the state. So, we need to stay in our lane here a little bit, stick to Louisville. My understanding was this was about Jefferson County PVA. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Of course.
there was a question, I think you alluded to it, and the language may deal with this, but I'm not certain. But there was a question as to how assessments are done by the PVA, which is, I'm using my words, more of a generalized process as opposed to specific property. I'm just wondering if this language really addresses that differences. I guess the word qualified to evaluate property for tax assessment purposes might take care of that.
That was our thought, Gerald. Tax assessment purposes is not like this for purposes of a sale. So if you think we need to have better language on that.
No, I
We
just
tried
want
to
to make sure
encapsulate
that's what the
that.
language intent was.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on 34? We will be adding 2 appointments to be made by National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Louisville chapter. Anything else? Let's move to 35.
Mr. Chairman, once again, I would just like to try to put the influx of the League of Cities in there, because if you're talking about suburban services, do you mean that's services that can be offered, or you're just talking about all suburban services that are in this? If you're talking about suburban services, I would like to share JCLC information and/or have them involved in that somehow. Or are you just mostly talking about lack of?
I think, Mayor John, what we're talking about in number 35, I think your point is certainly on point in my view. On the other one that we were talking about that we're going to come back to, but with respect to 35, this is kind of city services that are available around the county, and what we're trying to say here is that have a better interaction infrastructure for the city.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments on 35?
Well, I do believe Mayor Greenberg's already started this. He does have, Bonnie, is it monthly or bi-monthly meetings with all the mayors?
He's trying now to do about every 6 weeks. We've
Okay.
had one. Probably we'll have another one before the holidays, I'm sure.
So he's already doing that. So I think somewhere in there we need to give kudos. That they are doing this, and we hope that he continues reaching out to the suburban areas for input.
Well, I don't consider that a substantive change, so let's make that, let me make a recommendation. Marianne, on your, go to the last sentence, the councilman believes that Metro government should. Why don't we say the councilman believes that Metro government and the new mayor should continue to act to remedy? Does that acknowledge that actions have been, that steps have been taken?
Yeah.
Okay. So with the with that change, I'll read the sentence. I'm going to ask if this accurately reflects the agreement that we made. The commission believes Metro government and the new mayor should continue to act to remedy the situation back on text. With that change, does this accurately reflect our understanding of what we voted on?
Yes, but I don't remember voting on saying that I was okay with telling the mayor where his staff needs to live.
No, were you talking about where deputy mayor?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that was in our recommendation.
Well, I know that it was mentioned before, but I don't remember voting on that. And I certainly would not tell him or her that they have to hire staff based on where they live versus based on their skill levels.
We did vote on that. We can go back and get go ahead, Councilman.
Say, yeah, Earl Jones is on now. And I want to just tell Marianne, this was a subject of rather heated debate when it was voted on, and it was not a unanimous approval. So I think the point you're making was well articulated and heard, and nonetheless, this was the one that was approved. I think that the point the co-chair makes about adding this note about continued is an effort at least to acknowledge that the mayor has heard this concern.
And Mr. Co-Chair, if I could add, I think the language to some degree gives options. So it's not telling the mayor where he needs to hire his staff. It says creating an office of suburban services and/or by appointing a deputy mayor or two. So it's basically saying like, look, if there's a strategy around suburban services, then it can be an or statement. He doesn't have to hire necessarily people. So it's not so much ordering him. It's saying there's a couple options here on how the administration can demonstrate that they have a strategy around suburban services.
And to that point, Tony, I think it also says considering by the,
Correct.
Yeah. Any other comments on 35? Okay, number 37. So we added, I want to highlight for everyone, we added population density in here. That's not something that we discussed, but I think it was fairly in the conversation that we had.
Did you advise in the new language there, Jason?
Just right there. Yes, the new language is, it used to say population and economic development, and now it says population growth, population density, and economic development. I think it may have been Gerald that was mentioning that it should, when we're talking about population, we're not just talking about total numbers, but we're also talking about numbers in particular areas. I'm not articulating that as well as he did, but the density question is important as well, which would obviously help the more downtown area. Okay, so without hearing any comments on 37, we could move to 38.
Can we add in this one that they just do an overall review of Chapter 75, not just to require the election, but just an overall review? Because I know since they did this and last changed it in the 40s, I'm sure that the fire service has changed.
Well, if I could address that, I think there was some concern that an overall review might, let's say, invite others to make changes in the tax rates, the potential to increase the tax rates that these districts have. So the thought was to limit it to this, which was the issue that came up and was the subject of some concern. I mean, if there's something specific that you think should be addressed, we might do that, but I think just an overall, take a look and see what you want to change might be inviting more trouble than it's worth.
Okay. Any other comments on 38? Go to 39 on the last page. And Earl, we have 4 or 5 we're going to come back to because there were suggestions. I wanted to make sure that you were involved in that conversation. So number 39.
Okay, thank you.
You will note that we tried to get the language down in the last 2 sentences that were the subject of the most discussion when we met last time. So read it all, obviously, commissioners, but the last 2 sentences I think was the subject of most of our conversation. And I think we're missing the word "for."
Where is that?
Currently, KYTC mows the interstates and ramps no less than, actually the answer is 3 times a year.
It is 3, and Metro pays for a couple of times.
I think they do at least 1. That's why I was thinking 4, Marianne. You're right. Yep.
What is the change here?
And then
We left out the word 3, and currently KYTC mows the interstates and the ramps no less than, we left a blank and we say less than times per year. We need to add 3.
Well, we need him to mow more than that, so Metro doesn't have to do it.
Yeah,
and that's what the discussion.
yeah, just for clarity, that's exactly right. They currently do mow it 3 times.
Yeah.
Metro pays for an additional time or 2.
Right.
So I think, yeah, what Ms. Butler is saying we should do is recommend an increase. And I think it used to be 5.
I think we discussed using 4.
Right.
So it's no less than 4.
4 by the state, is that what we're saying?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. No less than 4 by the state.
Yep. So if we want, so right now, that sentence says how much they do it totally. So the next sentence, I guess, should be revised and say KYTC should realize this is in an urban area and the mowing of the interstate should occur no fewer than 4 times. Is that, Earl, you following me there?
Yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Should occur no fewer than 4 times annually. Let's leave the reference to the rural area out, maybe. Senator.
I understand why you want to leave the rural area out. However, I think we need to put, this is an urban area with a lot of pedestrians, something like that. Because I know in, you get over by Southern Parkway, Taylorsville Road, Bargetown Road, Taylor Boulevard, you've got a lot of pedestrians by these ramps that are walking the streets, whether they're getting to the bus line or whatever. It just needs to be cleaned up for them as well.
Okay. Here's what I, go ahead, Gerald, sorry.
Would it help or be permissible to add some language that that KYTC undertake a review as to additional needs in the various areas. In other words, imploring them to take another look as to whether they're meeting needs in some areas. Because I imagine it's probably an uneven kind of assessment you'd have to make, or at least outcomes in terms of just doing it across the board. I'm not sure what that means, quite frankly. So just to get them to look at it, you know, what are we deficient in, or
Well, we
Set-
want them to cut it too.
huh?
We
No,
want 'em
that's
to
where we
cut it,
that's where we
yeah.
have the 4. That's where we have the no less than 4.
Okay, Gerald, I think I've got your, let me see if I've got everyone's concepts here. So start with me on the last two sentences, and I'm going to change a little bit of the wording, or suggest that we change a little bit of the wording. Here we go. Currently, KYTC mows the interstates and the ramps no less than 3 times per year. KYTC should undertake an assessment to ensure its mowing practices are adequate and realize this is an urban area with a lot of pedestrians, and the mowing of the interstate should occur no fewer than 4 times annually. Does that satisfy everyone?
Yeah.
Any other
I would defer
comments
to
on?
Mary Ann Butler.
Do
on
what?
that. I would defer to you on that.
No, I mean, I think it's true. I mean, they need to realize we've got people walking in this area when grass is 3 or 4 feet tall, especially if it's a kid that's walking. That's an issue.
Yeah.
Any other comments on 39? Okay, we have a few that we need to go back to. The first one we need to go back to is in my notes on page 15, number 24. Bonnie, I think this was your suggestion that you wanted to add in. So you have the floor.
Yes, just that if they're going to have the, I don't know how to put it in, maybe also include the address or contact information for Jefferson County League of Cities. That way they can have that information, or work with them and the city so that they can get the full amount, their questions answered. Not that I'm questioning anybody wouldn't do that. I just want to make sure if a person asks about annexation, that they get the correct information. Or if they want to start a city, then they weigh their own options as to whether that's a good or bad idea. So just somehow include Jefferson County League of Cities in that?
Well, can I ask a question, clarification?
Sure.
The objective here is to say what Metro government shall do and how it should, what department should, a department should be designated to take care of these services or provide this information. Why is this something that the league can't do on its own?
Well, we do that on our own, but what I'm trying to do is work a relationship. And if someone comes to this department, you know, we want to work in cooperation. It might not be a good idea that they annex this one particular reasons because the services would not be as good. Maybe just, we're offering our services. Maybe it doesn't even have to be in this commission, but just to make sure that this department, has the information from the League of Cities. So it could be, it doesn't even have to be put in there. Just something that can be worked out within that department.
Bonnie, is that something that you think you could make an agreement with on our mayor without putting something in here? Or do you want?
Sure, I believe he's extremely cooperative, and I believe what's good for all of us is good for all of us. Whether it's in one form of government or the other, we're all still Louisville Metro. So sure, I can see that the president and executive director would work very close with the mayor's office if they're willing to do that.
Okay. My suggestion is let's see if that works, and if it doesn't, then we'll come back with something. Will that work for you?
Sure, thank you, yes.
The next one we need to come back to is on page 20, or excuse me, page 17, number 27. And there was, I don't remember, Gerald, was that you that had a comment on this one, or? Who do we
It's
put
the
him?
language, and you asked me to see if I
To
can
what?
pigeonhole that.
Okay, do
So
you
if
need
you
more
look-
time, or do you, go ahead.
No, I'm fine. If you go down to the, after the, as defined in KRS, provided however that if diversity cannot be achieved, Z should be an A. The appointed authority shall document, including demonstrating the efforts and inability to achieve diversity, comma, and make public the reasons why and appoint an otherwise qualified candidate. I'm sure there's some grammatical issues there, but
Okay.
that's the gist of it.
Okay, let me make sure I've got you. Okay, I'm going to read it back to you. Ready?
Yes.
To that end, the commission recommends that the boards and commissions throughout the state have diversity of members as defined in KRS 67C.139 sub 1 sub A. Provided, however, that if diversity cannot be achieved, the appointing authority shall document, including demonstrating the efforts taken and inability to achieve diversity, and make public the reasons why, and make public its findings,
May I suggest that instead of that place, that we move it over to, shall document and make public the efforts to, et cetera.
Yeah.
Reasons why
Yeah.
it wasn't.
I agree.
Move it there, Jason. Do you follow?
yes, sir.
It makes sense.
Okay, so Earl, provided, however, that if diversity cannot be achieved, the appointing authority shall document and make public its efforts taken and its inability to achieve diversity, and appoint an otherwise qualified candidate.
Well, I would say its efforts to achieve the required diversity and the reasons it was unable to do so.
Okay,
It has to, I think you have to put the word efforts in there.
I said efforts to achieve.
okay.
I didn't
That's
hear
what-
it, did I?
Its efforts to achieve the
Thank
required
you, Dr.
diversity.
Jones.
And its inability to do so
Okay,
before, before proceeding to appoint an otherwise qualified candidate.
perfect, okay. Okay, do I need to read it back, or are we good? All right, with that change on 27, any other comments on 27? That change and the typos, a change shall be made and the typos shall be fixed. The next one that we were looking at is 28. Earl, I was perplexed on what our thinking was on that one.
We're on page 28 or number 28?
Page 18, number 28.
Yeah, this was another one that produced quite a bit of discussion with concerns about overly complicating the process, slowing down the process, but nonetheless assuring that people who had concerns could have an input. So what was left, at least as I recall, was then just this idea of making certain that some provision was made in the statute that input by stakeholders and that wasn't further defined, but it clearly included residents, community members, et cetera, would have an opportunity to be heard. If this language here does not achieve that, we can obviously amend it, but it's as simple as that. Or was as simple as that.
I remember that request, I think, came from Jacory. If I could suggest that we finish the sentence in this way, Earl, input as cases are reviewed in making local planning decisions. And if it is as written, it's okay. I'm fine with that too.
So the word appropriate stakeholders, is that sufficient?
What would you
Sure, we-
suggest?
Um,
Following
appropriate
Washington DC
defined? How do you-
passengers on flight 2144, Edward Markey and Maya Salem giving their
Whoever's at the airport, please hit mute.
I'm, who determines what's appropriate?
Well, that's a good question. And I think we didn't have an answer to that question at the time. I think the clear implication of the discussion, though, was at least was residents, affected residents. And I guess my own take, Senator, was that rather than saying, let's say residents, and then have somebody say, and developers or somebody else, the idea was stakeholders. But if the sense is that the real concern is residents, I suppose we could make some specific reference to residents and other appropriate,
Right.
for example, stakeholders.
Can we just take out appropriate and say to include stakeholder input?
I think you almost have to put the residents in there somewhere. Otherwise, the muscle people will muscle out the residents. The vested interests may have a tendency to muscle out residents, which is a pretty common outcome. I think if you put residents including appropriate stakeholders or something like that, maybe.
Okay, residents and other stakeholders. How about that?
Yeah. Still raises the question of who
Who
does
they
it, but
are.
I understand it's work in progress.
Well, let's put it this way. The ones who are, let's say, who have a real stake in this, know who they are,
They'll be
and they're going to be there. So
Yes, they will.
It's true.
I think our citizens would appreciate having them put in there particularly though.
yes.
So just so I'm clear, the language is going to say review KRS to include appropriate, excuse me, review KRS to include residents and other appropriate stakeholder input as cases are reviewed. Is that right?
And your language at the end, in making local planning decisions.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I would like to take note that I get a lot of feedback from different places in the community of affected residents by this pro-development posture, which is one that's taking place across the country. And notwithstanding that, you find that a lot of living spaces have sanctuary from decision-making by planning and zoning people, and then just ordinary folk, when they go and try to speak before planning and zoning, it's kind of a foregone conclusion that they are actually not listened to well and not given the respect that we would hope would happen when the big guys who do this pro-growth and planning come into the scene. And the problem is that you got to have growth. You got to have, if you don't do that, what are you doing in the community? You got to grow, otherwise you regress. But the problem is, how do you balance that and get sufficient input recognized by planning and zoning? Because when it gets down into a highly localized situation, it may not be the proper place for that development. So now you have a attitude of pro-growth. Seems to me you got to give some leverage to the resident in that situation, because you're going through the door with a pro-growth initiative. I'm trying to get some balance in this, is where I'm coming from. Maybe I'm just putting that on the record. I know we can't resolve that here, perhaps, but I think it's something we should be mindful about.
I guess we'd hope that by specifically mentioning residents, that would be the effort to try to balance.
Well, that helps, but when you get into the mechanism of this, it's pretty much foregone conclusion that you're swimming upstream. So I've witnessed this, have advised on this at times, and it's pretty obvious that residents have very little leverage when they get into this process. And when we were out there listening to people across the spectrum, you found that in the Southwest, you found that in the East, and you found that in the West. Everyone was saying that, but I don't see anything reflected here that deals with that. And I'm not sure we can, but I'm thinking that we should put that on the record. At least I plan to put it on the record, because I think it's something we should consider when we start talking about pro-growth. We move into other people's space when we're making these determinations, and sometimes there's winners and losers in that environment. I understand that, but we should, the space that a human being lives in is a very, very important thing. In fact, that's all you really have, is that space. We should give leverage to that, is all I'm saying.
Points well taken.
So we're going to make those changes to 28 that we've identified. The next one we need to go to.
Before we go to that one, can we go back to number 11?
Certainly.
Dr. Coombs just sent me some information, and one thing we need to note is I'm not sure that the recommendation, the numbers are correct in here, because TARC got money for COVID. During the COVID years, looks like maybe 16 million. And so if we're going to compare this to true actual ridership, et cetera, I think we need to look at the numbers before they got this COVID influx of money, because that money's going away.
So those numbers came from our tax committee. Is there a way to?
I think you just need to circle back with Dr. Coombs, because he even talks about the COVID-19 injections have elapsed. They're not going to be getting that money anymore.
Yeah, I want to make sure, Marianne, that any changes that Earl and I make are okay with the commission. And today's the day we need to make them. So
well,
I wonder.
Dr. Coombs is on. Maybe we can ask him to elaborate about it a little more. I just want to make sure that the numbers we have in here are reflective, because if it's inflated by 16 million, that's a problem.
Yeah, Dr. Coombs, do you have the request in front of you, the recommendation in front of you?
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just sent Marianne an email to clarify that, because the statement as written there in that point is not correct. I never considered any federal money when I analyzed the growth in local tax revenue going to TARC. It was simply looking at the growth in the occupational taxes and the net profits taxes that is all, comes from the Revenue Commission. So its local tax support has gone up dramatically since merger, while ridership has gone down. I never looked at any federal influx and how that affected their budget.
So Dr. Coombs, this information was from the Ken Fleming and his tax commission or committee. And Ken, you can weigh in if you want to as well, but is that statement that's in there, you have it in front of you, Paul?
Yeah, it's the one in the first column, right?
It's the second column. I'll read it just to make sure we're talking about the exact same thing.
Which number is it?
It's number 11. If you have the most recent recommendations. And so let me read it just to make sure everybody's on the exact same page and we're not. I'm going from the top. The commission notes that discussions have been ongoing concerning TARP. The commission recognizes that tax income to the agency has risen and inflation adjusted 32 million or 38%, while ridership has decreased by 65% with buses in circulation decreasing by 23%. The commission further finds, and then back on text, which I don't think Mary Ann is questioning. So what I've read, what needs to change to make that an accurate statement?
Those statements are accurate, and that came from me based upon Metro government data. What I was trying to clarify was the one below that only made it to the first column, number 12. Where Mary Ann is saying that.
Yeah,
I
we
think,
don't.
I think we incorporated that with 11, so that didn't go any further.
Okay, we're good then. 11's fine.
Okay. You good, Mary Ann?
Yes.
To move on? Okay, I think we're moving on now to page 20, number 32. Bonnie, I think you were the ones that had a comment.
Good afternoon from Austin Logan.
Yes, sir. I just noticed that there was a whole lot of other language, that the only recommendation was just evaluating, recommending crime prevention. Maybe I think it's kind of necessary to add all that language in there. Am I
Got it.
confusing
No.
everybody? I think it should be explained because folks need to know the disproportionate amounts of where officers are, and they need to be where they need to be, but at the same time, I think it needs to be laid out exactly numbers that are correct. So I'd like to put that back in, other than just a short comment there.
So I think what we agreed, go ahead, if someone's speaking.
Yeah, Earl here. I'm a little confused. What is the recommendation? What is the change that's being sought?
So the changes being sought is accurately reflected in that sentence on the right, on the second column. But the context is important for the reader in Frankfurt to see. Why are we doing this? If you look at just the sentence standing alone, it indicates that as long as LMPD and the suburban police departments are covering the situation, then that's all we want. That's not what we want. When we voted on this, everything was left alone except for the last sentence in the first column, and then the last sentence in the first column was replaced with the only sentence in the second column. So I think what Bonnie's saying, and I agree with her, everything should be left in there on the first column except the last sentence, which is to be replaced with the sentence in the second column.
Chairs, I'm happy to add that context if we give additional context to crime rates, because just to put the context around the population versus policing that excludes the crimes that are actually happening, it's not the full picture.
I think we tried to, again, we had that discussion and that didn't come up, but we tried to incorporate that, Jacory, by saying it must be acknowledged, where is it? While the commission understands that policing decisions are difficult and complex. So I don't know, do you have the numbers that you want to add in there handy?
Yeah, there's a crime map, and I can export that data and send it over to you or Coombs or whoever if we want to include the ratio with population. I just think it's important to give full context if we're going to give context.
And obviously I have no problem with that at all. My fear is that if we leave just that last sentence, which is not what we agreed on, by the way, when we voted, but if we leave just that last sentence, then the reader can think that as long as J-Town police is covering J-Town, we're all good. And that's the opposite, the exact opposite of what we're trying to say. The context of police not being out in the suburban areas is the point.
What is the solution to that? I mean, does that suggest then that somehow the Metro Police should displace the suburban police?
Of course not. No, not at all.
Okay,
The suggestion.
I agree, but I assume that the point here then was to say that they need to work together to figure out what is an appropriate manning process manning process to determine, to assure that people in the outer areas are getting the additional protection that is maybe not being provided by the suburban police.
That's part of it. That's not the point of this. The point of this is people who are paying taxes for LMPD aren't getting the appropriate services, and then they got to pay a second tax for their own police department. And what we're saying is LMPD should, and we understand they're very complex, which is why we're not pushing and forcing, but we're saying, and I think that our new police chief has already said she wants to do this, but we're saying that LMPD needs to adequately police the entire community. And they need to reevaluate what they're doing to see if they can do better with that. And we'll have them work with suburban police departments, but the suburban police departments shouldn't supplant LMPD. So we don't want LMPD to say, well, we don't have to go to Linden because Linden is policed already by themselves. When the people of Linden are also paying, like everybody is, are also paying the tax for LMPD, are entitled to LMPD services. That's the point.
Mr. Chairman, this highlighted wording, I think, really is quite adequate. In fact, when we look at this other information as an example, I think is actually misleading because I think it's a lot more complex than that. I assume that's what Metro Councilman Arthur is referring to, at least in part. He can speak for himself. But I think when you trot something out there, 1, 2, or 3 in terms of an element into a very complex situation, actually you can get a skewed perspective on the subject matter you're dealing with. But if you look at the language here, it says the commission calls on Metro government working together with suburban police departments. These are the people who know how it works across the multiple districts to evaluate. So that's where you want them to go. You want them to go and let's take a good hard look at this and then give us a recommendation on how this can be addressed. I don't know how you can say that any clearer. I think this language is excellent.
The recommendation that is here is not what we voted on. The rest of the stuff was supposed to be carried over. That's what we voted on. And the recommendation here indicates, if I were to read it out of the blue and didn't have the discussion, it indicates that as long as suburban police are covering the area, then that area is adequately policed. That is the opposite of what we're saying. We're not saying that at all.
I don't read it
That's
that
the
way.
point I'm making, though.
I don't read it that way at all. Look, here's the problem here. We had testimony that the Metro Police Department was short 300 something officers. So, I mean, I guess I'm trying to say what it is. You've made the point that Metro Police are not, I guess, adequately. I'm not sure even what the adjective should be or the adverb should be. Adequately. We can't say what's in the middle column is the false assumption or the false predicate that police should be dispersed throughout the county based on population, and that's clearly false. Nobody would support that.
No, of course not.
I understand. Let me finish though. So if indeed we're going to say that the fuller picture is to be shown by talking about the extent to which there's under policing in the suburban areas, and that is let's assume that's a fair point, it needs to be fully balanced by the fact that why is that the case? Because the assumption behind the statement in the middle column is that it's done either through malice, incompetence, neglect, or who the hell knows what. The data that Councilman Jacori Arthur is suggesting we put in here is critical to balance why things are as they are, and therefore why the two or all the entire community needs to work together to evaluate and decide where we go from here to make this better.
I agree completely.
So it's got to be, either we're going to focus on moving forward with the solution, and if we want to say the basis for the need to do so is the current situation, then the current situation needs to be more completely described.
Earl, I agree with, I don't have a problem with that in that information. We've had this debate. This was the language we voted on.
No,
I
no,
don't know why.
Jason, we voted on this, everything we voted on was conceptual. It was not
Right.
final language.
No, the only language that we changed was to the last sentence. The first 3 or 4 sentences were supposed to come over whole hog. There were no changes to those. If we needed to add crime numbers to provide context, that's fine. And that's why we said in here that the police, their decisions are difficult and complex. If there is no malice, we said that a bunch of, we said that, let me finish if I might. We said that a number of times when we discussed this matter. There's no malice and we're not trying to force anything. But this does not reflect what we voted on. It doesn't. And I think it suggests the opposite.
I'm confused. We, for several days, we said we were going to deal with these items conceptual. So apparently there's a difference of opinion of what conceptual means in the process if we employed here. So that means that whatever we conceptually agreed to, which suggests to me that there's still some wording issues and that those adjustments are still open
Okay.
issue. Because
All
we
right,
did it, what, if I may?
Yep.
Because we did it conceptually. And when you do it conceptually, that doesn't say that each word is necessarily written in stone, as long as it reflects conceptually. So I hear it may have been what you meant in your mind and somebody else meant in their mind, but that wasn't what I left here with. What I just heard is the way I understood we were undertaking our business here. And let me just say lastly, that's the point I was making. If you put this kind of information in here the way this is, it doesn't get into the complexities of it and doesn't get into what the real issue is. And that's why these words, working together with suburban police departments to evaluate and recommend crime prevention services, provide adequate policing across the entire county, are very important. And I think it's conceptually consistent.
And Gerald, I agree with that language. I want it to be added on to the rest and not completely supplant it. So here's my suggestion. If we're only going to use that sentence, I want to delete it altogether, not make the recommendations, and we can handle it later on. I do not want that sentence to be a standalone. It does the opposite of what I intended to do. So if we're not going to add the rest, which I understand that we were going to do, and I know that but if we're not going to do that, then I want to drop this one altogether and handle it later.
Well, instead of dropping it, we could vote on which way we want to go. I think the whole matter, what we want to address is we want to say LMPD should show how they're going to police the whole county as they are paid to do. If a community wants to add on and pay for their own police force, they can do that. And then, since they have extra protection that they paid for, then the LMPD and the suburban police departments should get together on how properly to police the whole county, considering that. But to pull the LMPD out of the areas that are being policed is the major issue here. We don't want that done, and we think that it is being done.
We have what I would call anecdotal evidence to the fact that the police are, quote, not policing around. In fact, they are. The issue here is not whether they are, it's whether it's the adequacy of their policing. And the reason why it is deemed inadequate is because there isn't sufficient manning. And because, you don't go to treat a dog bite when somebody's has an ambulance crash or when somebody's been shot. And that is the critical issue here. I have no problem including the information in the middle column. But if we're going to do that, and if that's going to be the basis of a recommendation, then the recommendations should be fully describing the condition. So we have time. If the data is available to add into the middle column as to what the crime rates are and where they're occurring, we should do that. There's no reason not to do that unless somebody wants to cook these books.
Of
Frankly.
course, we don't want to cook the books. If we
Okay,
wanted to
then
cook the
let's, then
books,
let's move on and get the data.
well, we can get the data. We've already voted on
Okay.
this. I don't know why this is just coming
Oh,
up, but if we wanted to
conceptually,
cook,
we voted on it.
Because,
No,
because again, as I said before,
not right.
because nobody understood that this was a critical element in a go-forward decision. I didn't.
Okay, can I ask Councilman Arthur, are you wanting to include a map? Is that what you asked? It's like,
No, we don't have to include the map. I can just add context to some of the crime data, such as non-fatal shootings. 73% of them in 2022 happened in LMPD divisions 1, 4,
well, to
and
me, I think
also
that's information that's vital as well, you know? I'm seeing an uptick in crimes that are happening in my area, so I honestly believe that, you know, adding that information to this, I don't see a problem with that.
Either.
I think we're in agreement on adding Councilman Arthur's suggestion. What we're not in agreement with is adding back the language that was there also.
Well, we're going to add all the language into the right column.
Okay, if it's
That's the point here. If we're going to put the correct context in this recommendation, we'll put the data from both the where the crime is occurring as well as where the police are policing.
And it's not just shootings. It's robberies, it's burglaries, it's crime. It's not just shootings. The people all over the county are entitled to policing, even for their car wrecks, for their burglaries. It's not just
Okay.
the.
I'm
Okay.
gonna say this one more time.
Exactly. And do we have any data here which says what is the response rate inside the USD or other areas of the police for burglaries? I can tell you, it's not great
Okay.
because that's not where, you know, that's not where the action is. It's not where the need is. It's critical. It comes later. It's not immediate. So I mean, if we got the data, let's put the data in and we can move on.
We should have
I
had
just
it
wanted to
weeks ago, but I guess we'll get it quickly.
I just wanted to highlight something Co-Chair Jones mentioned about the shortage. Using that in context with what we just talked about the level of the seriousness of the crimes is important. Because of the shortage, them responding to burglaries and them responding to traffic accidents is not going to have the same level of response compared to the shootings. And that's why I mentioned the shootings.
Mr. Chair, if I could weigh in real quick. First of all, I got to be honest, I'm trying to figure out where to chime in here. I'm not sure precisely what we're disagreeing on yet. I'm a little fuzzy right now. As far as just to round out some of the debate on what Councilman Arthur's saying, and I know he looks at the data very, very closely. I'll give you a few examples. And then, you know, if we were to get what Chairman Jones is indicating, Jody Myman does have that. Emergency Services does have, and they categorize it by, they have certain levels of emergency, shootings being a priority 1, all the way down to extremely low priority, you know, no property damage, no personal damage type emergency or type calls, right? So we have some of that information. We would just need to pull it. The data is probably going to be a little funky because, for example, during COVID, and when I say during COVID, they only reinstated it about a year ago. In my district, there was a complete cease for all property crime response rate, period. The police department told you to fill out a report online, and they didn't even come. So there's actually no recording of a response at all because they just stopped responding in its totality. I actually, and again, coming back to where I'm not sure where we're disagreeing at this point. I don't see disagreement in the totality of the analysis, which includes reflecting what the one column does, which is there's a tenfold shift in police per capita between the highest density district to the lowest density division, not district. And also reflecting crime rates, right? And saying that the analysis should include that. So I think it's all applicable. And, you know, frankly, for me, the net result is going to be that the administration through the chief, which I believe she's already begun, is going to finish her review of the strength of the police department. We've got to combine that with and partner with the suburban districts who have started providing police services and understand how that works. And we have to include, as Councilman Arthur indicated, right, some of the other services that surround public safety, because it's not just LMPD. There's other agencies that sort of interact with this. So, you know, maybe somebody can clarify where the actual disagreement is on the language, or we might not be able to resolve it today. Let's take a step back, redraft it, and then vote on it. But, you know, I'm not clear on a path forward. I'm also not clear on where the major disagreement is here at this point.
I think you articulated it very clearly.
And Tony, we can't go back and redraft it. Today's the final date. We voted on this weeks ago. I wish we had this information then. That's the problem. If we would go back and we would go get a bunch of crime data that we could agree adequately encompasses what we want to encompass, that's one thing. But it's now the last day. We voted on this weeks ago. That's the problem.
I think part of the problem is the process too, because I have a different understanding of what we're doing here than what you're saying now. Maybe I'm the only one that has that opinion, but I think it's important, the context. If you put all the information in there, I think it, for me, it'd be sufficient. Otherwise, you take out that other information because it'll skew the context, quite frankly.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Senator.
Sorry, I'm fine.
Let me just say something, Tony. And here's the way I look at this. This is not a partisan issue for sure. And it isn't even an issue in which we really all disagree. We're all on the same page. There's a problem with crime and there's a problem with police, with the adequacy of policing in the county. The only thing that that the point of contention is whether or not the recommendation to the legislature is going to properly reflect the reasons why we are concerned and the basis on which we're suggesting that some action be taken, again, locally, not even by the legislature, by the way, but to the extent that the legislature is interested and wants to provide some guidance. Thank you. So that being the case, we should have no disagreement now to make certain that the legislature has the information that would be relevant for them to act, and certainly information that Metro government should have to act. We're expressing the concerns of the citizens of this county, not merely the members of this commission. And I look at this in that context and I take it very seriously. And I think that we should all bear that in mind. It doesn't matter where you live. You have the same concerns about crime and protection of citizens that anybody else does. And we should make sure we reflect that in the recommendation that comes out of this commission. Otherwise, it really calls into question why we're here and what our objectives are.
And Earl, not a single person disagrees with what you just said. Not a single person.
That's
The
good.
problem now is it's the last day. This was voted on weeks ago. Why didn't we say this then? So then we could look at let me finish. So then we could look at the data. So if Jacory comes up with 7 things and we agree with all 7 of them, that's great. If assuming he's going to go back to those numbers. But what if we think 8, 9, 10, and 11 should also be added? That's why it should have been done weeks ago. Nobody agrees that the context should be in there if we're going to provide context. Nobody disagrees with that. But now we don't have time to get it.
But see, this gets back to the other question, Jason, and that is, you know, many of us raised these questions before. I raised them before. I talked about where's the crime incidence, and I said these data don't reflect that, and therefore, but when you got to the point where we're saying, fine, if I'd understood that this was going to be critical to the recommendation coming out, as opposed to information that informed the recommendation, then it would never have gotten to the point it got to. Or at least the debate would have been a hell of a lot more vigorous than it was.
Okay, I don't know.
So this
that we
gets
have-
back to the question of the notion of what our business was here. And I don't believe anybody understood, and certainly those of us, many of us didn't, that that voting for things conceptually meant we were locked into the language. Because if that's the case, then no amendment in the right, in the far right column should be accepted, period. We cannot have it both ways.
This question. So I have three questions. One, would the sponsors of this language be okay with being consistent with the way that we characterize it if we add the language in, the fuller column? It mentions at the top that services are inadequate. Then later on, after the data is given, it says there are areas that are simply not receiving police services that their tax dollars pay for. So one says it's inadequate, one says they're not getting police services at all. Can we just stick to agreeing that the services are inadequate? That's my first question.
What do you want? What language you suggest in the strike, Corey?
So instead of after we say difficult and complex, it must be acknowledged that there are wide areas of the county that are simply not receiving police services that their tax dollars pay
I
for.
would say that's not accurate. It's inadequate.
Could we get rid of that part? Because we already said they're inadequate at the top. Now we're saying they don't get them at all. So could we just stick with they're inadequate? Is that okay?
So, okay, I think that's fine. So, and then
And
you want to drop the language of the language in the for example sentence.
So instead of ending with saying they don't get police services, we go with while the commission understands policing decisions are difficult and complex, for example, and then there we can have the placeholders for the disproportionality of where the crimes are. You know that I want to include shootings and homicides, also heard robberies and burglaries. What else do we want to include? Because the crime data is public. All we would need to do is put a placeholder now. I can punch out the percentages, or Dr. Coombs can punch out the percentages, and then we can add it in there before we submit the final report.
That's fine with me. And then can we put a is there a page that Louisville Metro has with the crime data that we can actually put that citation in here?
Absolutely. Data.
Okay, that handles my problem.
.gov. Okay, I just want to make sure we knew it. So I want shootings and homicides. I heard burglaries. What else do we want in there?
Just violent crime, and that's generally. But we want. I want crime. But if we're gonna cite the citation, I think the violent crime that you're talking about is fine, is good enough. And then it could add on robberies, and then refer to the citation where people can go and look and get the rest of it.
Yes. Okay. So just to be clear, because I have all the raw data in front of me: shootings, homicides, burglaries, and robberies. Is there anything else anyone wants to add?
Yeah, I think that Jacory, it's Tony. Yeah, that sounds good. Unless I don't have the categories in front of me, but I mean, think violent crime, property crime. So any of the categories that fall into violent crime, property crime, put them in, and I think we're good. Unless there's like way too many, or is it too interpretive?
So the raw data is pretty clear about what the crime is, and it's all listed out. And I'm pulling from 2022, if that's okay, in just that year.
Yeah.
Do you want me to send that to Coombs to punch out the percentages? Do you want me to do it and submit it to everybody, or what?
What do you mean when you say percentages?
So you see how we have numbers of how many officers.
Right.
Those ratios are essentially trying to say is disproportionate. Instead of putting there are X amount of robberies or X amount of homicides, I was just going to do percentages with the divisions in a similar way, like the divisions up top use ratios. So just using percentages so we're not looking at the totals, because it can be confusing for folks to check out.
Okay, so you're saying the percentage of all burglaries in the county are this broken out this way by police division?
So using the percentages to suggest that most of them are in those areas, because we're talking about the whole county. So again, Division 1, 2, and 4, 73% of the non-fatal shootings last year in 2022 were in just those three divisions. So that shows you that there weren't as many in the rest of the divisions.
I think that's important information. And Jacory, whatever you want to add is fine with me if we're going to have that citation, so whoever the reader is can go and look at the rest of the data. And so to make sure I understand, the recommendation is this: Let me read it all if I could. The commission acknowledges, so we're not going to change anything except for we're going to delete the language after the word complex. We're deleting, it must be acknowledged that there are wide areas of the county that are simply not receiving police services that their tax dollars pay for. That's deleted. After the word complex, delete that, and you're going to add in information that we've just discussed about the crime data and so forth and so on, right? And then
Right,
we're back,
and
and then we're back on text. The Commonwealth acknowledges blah blah blah.
Yeah,
that
and
what
it
the
might make
recommendation-
sense to get rid of the word while as well, just so we go straight into the commission understands policing decisions are difficult and complex. For example, and that's where we talk about the disproportionalities of crime, and then we pick up afterwards.
Okay. I'm fine with that change. Those changes.
Yeah, I'm good with that too, Tori.
Is everybody else smooth with that?
Can somebody read the entire statement then? And let's make sure we understand, we're reading from the proposal column, if you will. And the idea is that the language that's now being read will now be moved over to the far right column. And does anything in the far right column remain?
Yes, that whole sentence remains. It's
Okay,
the
so
plan
we're inserting on top of that. Okay,
You want me to try to read it, Earl?
please.
See if we can. It's okay. All right. The commission acknowledges that Louisville Metro Police Department services are not adequately provided across the county. For example, there is one LMPD officer, police officer for every 2,887 residents in Division 8, Eastern Jefferson. One LMPD police officer for every 1,051 residents in Division 3, Southwestern Jefferson. And one LMPD officer for every 374 residents in Division 1, downtown West Jefferson, period. The commission understands that policing decisions are difficult and complex, period. Jacory is going to have, for example, and then Jacory's information about the crime data. Correct, Jacory? That's where you're going to put that.
And I'll include the citation as well.
That's right. And then we're going to say, the commission acknowledges that many of these underserved areas have contracted with other police departments or with off-duty police officers to provide police services. And I think in keeping with the spirit of Jacory's recommendation is to have a period after that, and we would delete their tax dollars should already be providing them. Back on text, other underserved areas have created an additional police department to provide policing services, period. Again, within the spirit of the recommendation, we're going to delete their tax dollars should already be providing them. Then, so back on that, other underserved areas have created an additional police department to provide policing services, period. The commission calls on Metro government to working together with suburban police departments to evaluate and recommend crime prevention services to provide adequate policing across the entire county. Is that whatever we, Corey? Sorry, go ahead. Sure.
Big elephant in the room. The big elephant in the room is not just the distribution or allocation of resources, i.e. police. But the big elephant in the room is what is the adequate amount of funding to achieve what, where? And I think that's an essential element, because if you start with something that's inadequately funded, you're going to still end up with inadequacy no matter what you do. So I'm not sure this gets to it.
So
one of my concerns in this whole thing, this whole process, is trying to achieve balance, that we take something from one place of need, demonstrated need, and we shift it to another place of demonstrated need. And what have we done? So the question is, and I've said this over and over again, win-win, or is it a win-lose, or what is this? And I don't think we can avoid in any of this, not just funding. We just talked about 300 short in terms of Metro. The ability to even provide services and have those components that are necessary to even provide it. It goes beyond funding. So there's a lot of it. This is very complex stuff, is what I'm saying. This is very complex stuff. And what's evolved historically is reacting to, responding to strategically or tactically to what was available to deal with the perceived or real needs are. So I'm just saying, I hear all this, but I'm not sure it really goes beyond just that one statement. We talking about context and all of that. To evaluate that and to look at all aspects as to how to deal with any inadequacies really deals with the subject matter, in my view. And I'm not knocking the statistical stuff and all of that, because that figures in, but I just don't think it really creates the full context.
Are you
Gerald, do you wanna-
suggesting,
Go ahead.
sorry, are you suggesting that funding be added as one of the things
Well,
that we evaluate?
The reason why I hesitate to respond is that it takes a thought process to get your head around all of that. And I'm not sure I can get my head around all of that, what I just said. And of course, that's been one of my, I raise this all the time. That's why I have a critique of the process and not as a, and not at a shot at anyone, you know, but I think the process sometimes limits your ability. You know, you set a time frame, you take on this big animal, and then you have deficiencies in how you have a information base on which to make really good decisions, and everyone comes in with there's a problem and they have a perceived notion of how to solve it. So all I'm saying is, at the end of the day, we must design win-win solutions. And I just want to remind you that. I'm not sure that does this, but I think this general statement over here, I think it actually does. I'm talking about the right column. I think it does a great job. And that does not negate what Councilman Arthur is speaking of, nor the earlier suggestion as well. I mean, he put it all in there, that's fine, but that's the key. That's the major statement right there.
Well, it seems to me that maybe I had two thoughts. One is maybe funding needs to be added here, but beyond that, I think that Councilman Arthur's information should include as well the number of police that we're down, that the force is down.
Mr. Chair, I think what we spoke about last time was it's really hard to say what that number is. The number is not, I loathe to put a number in there because we've been running under the assumption that we're down 300. We don't know because we don't have the report done. And it's so outdated.
How would you suggest that we deal with that particular question?
We do what the recommendation is, right? Which is that Metro has to complete a study, evaluate it, look at what the strength of force needs to be, evaluating all the variables that I think we brought up here, right? Staffing and crime rates.
Has the police department taken a position as to what number it is down by? Or has the Metro government taken a position, whether it's accurate or not?
The position right now is it's 300, but that's predicated on an assumption that they know is outdated.
Well, then all we can do is what we have, you know? If that's the number that they're operating under, assumedly it'll be changed when they get the data. But at the moment, if that's what we got, I don't think we can just sort of assume that we don't know how much we're down and maybe we're even up, which is what would be left, the assumption one might conclude from that. So I think it's fair to put down what we know.
Yeah, let's put it in there. It's an immaterial point, I think, but let's put it in there. 300 is fine. When they do the study, they'll make it higher or lower.
Funding.
Okay, and then I think, Earl, we should add that adequate policing and funding across the entire county. That's probably where Gerald's suggestion might fit.
Yes.
Okay, Jacor, you getting that information over to us? Okay. Anything else on 32? Earl, on 34.
Not many.
Earl, on 34,
Yes.
we add, just so you know, at Gerald's request, we added 2 additional appointments from the National Association of the Board of Real Estate.
National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Louisville.
Right. National
Louisville
Association of Real
Board.
Estate Brokers, Louisville Board.
Chapter. Yeah.
Thank you. So just wanted to make sure I flagged that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that's it.
Mr. Chairman, does that mean that our job is done today?
Have you all discussed the sort of what the report looks like?
No.
Well,
Button
I'd sent to Brian a kind of an introduction. Did you all, was that distributed? I guess I just like, I don't, and Brian and Jason and I have not had a chance to talk about this either, but I think we need to have something which says, you know, who we are, what we've done, and then here's the report. And that's what I think you have been provided a copy of. If you could just take a look at it, and if we're sort of generally good with that approach, at least, we sort of know what the thing will look like, what the kind of the final package might look like, at least.
Mr. Chairman, shouldn't we put a disclaimer in there as to it's not all encompassing,
What's not all encompassing?
this report?
How would that, what, not all encompassing of what?
That's the point. I keep making this point. I'm saying it over and over again. I don't think we've allowed, and I don't describe this to any individual, but I don't think there's sufficient time or sufficient in-depth research, data, et cetera, evaluations I think it takes a lot more time to do this kind of work. And not that some good things have not happened. I think there's some things that I think clearly calls for action. But I think there are other things that are so complex, you know, at least in my dealing with this, smacks me as being less than thorough.
Well, then are you suggesting then that a recommendation, or at least something be said in the message to the General Assembly that what? That they should provide more analysis, that they should provide more time, that some things require greater information?
Something that says something like that this is not an end all, because I think it's going to take, there's some real complex issues here, at least in my experience, in some of these.
Well, I obviously agree with you on that. I guess my concern is how do we express that?
Yeah.
And what are we saying that we want to happen on account of that? Are we asking that the legislature have hearings on that? Are we asking that they?
I'm almost afraid to even say that. I withdraw my concern. I've been saying it all along. I've repeated it over and over. I respect
take your
everybody
point.
that's in the process. I like the time that people committed, but this is complex stuff. You know, it's not the first time I've been around this barn. This is complex stuff.
Yeah, and frankly, the thing that bothers me most, Senator, in that regard is that, I mean, as complex as it has been, and as I think as much effort as the Commission has put into it, you know, we started late because we didn't have the support that we needed from the beginning, and it's just unfortunate that's the case.
Well, but because of that laid the playing field. It made it even more of an issue, and that's why I say I don't put this at any individual's foot, you know. But
Mr. Chairman?
very concerning to me.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Senator Neal. I think that this is really a critical piece that, and maybe we just say something based, you know, that this is just the first step, that this commission recognizes that we have further work to do, and we look forward to, you know, convening with the appropriate stakeholders, the mayor's office and the Metro Council and the General Assembly to continue the conversation where appropriate, something of that effect. But I think that there needs to be a sentiment made that this is just the first step in the process.
Well, maybe the second step in the process, because we already initiated legislation that took steps without input from the local to even get to this step. And that also gives me concern. I think we ought to listen very carefully to the local, not just to a stakeholder who perhaps occupies a seat of power or position. And I don't point that at any individual, but it concerns me that despite our efforts, because of the truncation of the time and other factors, which I won't get into, that I think we've operated on some really restrained circumstances. I'm concerned about various of the issues. Some of this stuff I look at and I say, oh, wow, that's great. But some of this, I'm concerned about when we take things to Frankfurt to determine how things are going to happen on a local level. And, it's a very political environment. We all know that. I go back to this, and I mean no malice when I say it's a reality. And I'm very concerned about that when we don't have all that other stuff behind it and we go running off in Frankfurt. There's a lot of legislation, I think, in Frankfurt that we promulgate that we would wish we pulled back, at least certain factions of us historically. I won't give examples. I don't want to belabor the point. I think I've expressed myself adequately. Thank you. And thank you for your comments. And I'm always ready to engage in further conversation about anything.
I think Jacory may be ready with his recommendations. Jacory, are you ready?
Yeah, I just wanted to let it be known, I sent the root cause for the public health recommendations instead of going through that report because they're updating it for 2023. If we could just list public health on the list that's on page 21, recommendation 33.
Okay.
It already lists crime, education, incentivizing homeownership, and attracting and retaining businesses to our metro areas. If we can just add public health to that list, it would get the intent because they send out these recommendations to the state every few years.
Jacory, where do you want that word, which includes addressing issues of crime, education, incentivizing a home ownership, comma, what word do you want?
It could just say issues of crime, public health, educate, just add it to that list.
Okay.
Yeah, because the health department puts out the health equity report every few years. They have recommendations for the state. So that was really the intent behind that recommendation.
Okay, so
Can
if
you
people
say which one that is again, what page and what number?
page 22, 33. So the change would be, make sure I have this right, Jacory. Looking up, let's start on the fourth line from the bottom, starts Louisville, which includes addressing issues of crime, education, incentivizing home ownership, public health, and let's change that around. Crime, education, public health, incentivizing home ownership, and attracting and retaining businesses for our metro area. Is that okay?
So
Okay. Are you ready with the crime number stuff? You're on mute, Jacory.
no, and it might be faster for Paul to do it because it's thousands of pieces of raw data and my computer keeps freezing. So I can send it to Paul if you want me to, or I can keep trying to punch it.
Let me ask the commissioners if they would be okay with if Jacory gets that information to Earl and to me, or Jacory, you and Paul get it to Earl and to me, and if there's no objections from Earl or me, then we add that information in there. We'll have the citation to the place that people can go look at. Is that okay with the commissioners? Any objections? Okay, so Jacory, if you could get that to Earl, Paul, and me. And then Earl, how do you want me to go through all they're very minor, a couple, take away highlights, a couple typos, that kind of thing with you?
Yes. Well, let me ask a question. Maybe it's, can we go off the record? Is such a thing? The 15th, sometimes in Frankfurt, they've stopped the clock. I've heard about that anyway. I guess they can't do that anymore, huh? Okay, that's gone. So I guess my question is, what are we understanding about are we talking midnight? Are we talking?
I don't know. Let me suggest to Senators Nemus, Neal, Adams, Representative Stevenson, and Fleming that the 15th was the end of the week, so before Monday. Is that maybe we should do it today, Earl? I mean, that's what the rule says. That's what we need to do. I think we're really close to it. Other than that one suggestion, really, it's like deleting the word Shively.
Do you want to just stay here in chamber somewhere or in a conference room? Because I don't have my computer. But let's make an effort then to finish things up at least manually, and then I can get to my computer. I can finish it up. The other thing that I guess I wanted to understand is on Jacori's question about the data. Do you all have an ETA on when that might be? You and Paul, whether that's going to be in the next half hour or what, or much later than that?
I just text Paul. Maybe you could give us an estimate. Just again, it's all raw data, and I just have two columns: the crime type and then the LMPD division. And I'm just trying to convert everything into percentages. So, Paul,
if it's as simple as that, I'll turn it around right away.
Thank you.
So here's my suggestion, and this is any commissioner chime in, obviously. I think our work as the commission is done, except for the information that we're talking about that Jacori's getting us. The rest of the stuff, I think we can just go ahead and adjourn. Earl and I will do exactly what everybody's agreed to today on the typographical errors, so forth and so on, that we've already went all through, and then we'll just submit it and copy everybody. Does that satisfy everyone, or do we need to make?
It does me, and I think it's just a technical thing. It's not a substantive change if you really stop and think about it.
That's right, Gerald. The only substantive thing is the information we just discussed on the numbers, on the criminal.
And I don't even consider that substantive. If you frame it a certain way, it becomes a technical piece to support the basic, thing.
Okay.
And I just want to join in with Senator Adams and Senator Neal to make sure that whatever language you put in there, that this is not a report to take action. It's a make new legislation. It's actually a report to investigate and create. And that's my fear, that if it goes to Frankfurt, I don't want anyone to pull it and say, we got what we need to do legislation and change things.
I don't know that that's what Julie said. I don't agree with that.
That certainly is a fear.
That's the intent.
Frankfurt is a unusual environment, to say the least.
I think Julie did say, she absolutely did say, I agree with Gerald, we should have some caveats in there.
Yeah. Sorry, Carol. Yeah, I think she said we'll come back to some more information. There's a lot of things we didn't look into that I want to look into, but with respect to some of the things like that, I mean, we can just go through and pick. That was the TARP one. That was a recommendation. The EMS stuff. I intend to act on that. I don't want anybody to think that that's just some kind of a thought process. We're asking Frankfurt to act on those things.
Well, and that's the problem. The problem is what we do about it. I just think at the end of the day, we're going to have to operate on a basis of trust and integrity. And I keep interjecting this point about a win-win. I think that's really our guide in doing this kind of work. We don't want losers in this work. We should strive to achieve that. If we do anything less, then we're actually undermining our responsibility to the process. I've already pointed to the other issues I have. But I think, we've moved here, it's going forward, and, we take it from here and do the best we can with it, with integrity.
And I just want to make sure as integrity goes, I want everybody to know my intention. I'm going to take these recommendations and draft a bill. So if anybody says these were just thought experiments, we all agreed not to move forward. That is not true. I want to make that clear right now.
I'm thinking.
Well, this commission is commissioned to make recommendations. Yeah. What any individual or what happens in Frankfurt happens in Frankfurt. This commission is pretty much done with its recommendations, with the exception of Jacori's figures and the two chairmen getting together, make sure the language is what we just now agreed to, and the commission is over with. What happens in Frankfurt, we'll take care of.
Well, let me just tell you, that's true. Whatever happens in Frankfurt, but it affects everybody. Again, I'm saying with integrity means there has to be winners all around to the extent that we can make that happen. If we're not doing that, then we really have fallen short of our responsibility. And I trust my colleagues will operate on that basis. So we'll see. I like working with my colleagues.
Okay, I just observed that there are many observations, I guess, or conclusions in this report that don't call for legislation, that simply some things directed back to the metro government, and some things are just sort of observations, period.
Right.
I'm assuming that only the things that where the commission is actually recommending that the General Assembly take action would be the basis of legislation.
Of course.
As far as the commission is concerned.
I would want to point out one other thing. When we did merger, that was done on the ground. And what happened in Frankfurt was a reflection of what happened on the ground. In other words, they adopted what was submitted to them, except for the technical considerations. What's happening here, in part, is that we're saying, here's what we think, and now we are deferring this to Frankfurt to create the creature. That's a different process than when merger was put together. So we need to be cognizant of that, because it becomes it's political on the ground down here, but guess what? It's political on the ground up there. And most of the people up there have nothing to do, just like they did when we did merger, with Jefferson County. They have nothing to do with Jefferson County. So what that means is there's a disproportionate amount of leverage of those who are related to Jefferson County, including myself, in terms of what that outcome will look like. And that should always be a concern, because not everyone agrees. It's a messy process. We all know that. But I'm trusting that my colleagues who I've worked on a number of occasions, they're all people I respect and admire going forward. And I think we can get that done. We've done this. We're all part of this. So I'm cautioning is what I'm saying, because sometimes we can have good ideas and we feel vested in them, but it might create a loser on the other side, and that gives me a lot of consternation. That's all I'm talking about.
Mr. Chairman, can I say something too?
Yes, please.
I feel like this process has been as collaborative and conducive as possible, given the time frame in which the legislation allowed us. But I do take a little umbrage at the continued use of the term political, because I don't feel like this is political. I feel like this is an overview of how merger is working. Is it working for some? Is it working for all? Let's try to put the pieces together so we can have a more efficient government. I haven't heard anyone say anything disparaging about our new mayor. In fact, everybody has said we have high hopes that he is going to be looking at new processes too. So I don't want to leave on a sour note, because I really believe that this has been a positive experience, and I'm looking forward to working with the mayor to make things even better. And so I want everybody to feel as good as I do about the product that we have put forward.
I'm concerned there's a characterization of a sour note. I guess that refers to some statements I may have made here. I certainly didn't intend for them to sound sour. They were just words of caution and words of reality. So, maybe I'm misinterpreting what I just heard, but I think that what we have to do is be cautious, because there's a lot of impact in the outcome. And I'm concerned that we do not have losers in this process. That's all I am saying. And we all have said the time is short, and the legislature did that, and not by purpose, I don't think. And we also know that the construct that we have here that set this in motion was done pretty much arbitrarily. And we can get into that discussion too. But I'm hopeful that we can work together with integrity, not to end up with losers. Nothing sour about that. I'm willing.
So Earl, I guess I'll call you. I think our work is done on the commission as a global. I'll call you and we'll go over these changes. And then once we get them from Jacory and Paul, then we'll incorporate that and then we'll send it on to LRC. Is that right?
Yes. So I guess we're ready to conclude. I just want to say, at least on my own behalf, I want to thank my colleagues on the commission for the work, the effort they've made in pulling together this whole process and creating this final report. It has not been easy in all respects. I do believe that everybody operated at least with integrity and with best intentions as they saw it. I do think that at the end, we wound up in a better place than I think we began through the process of collaboration and I think accepting the good faith of each other. So move to adjourn and see you all next time.
Second.